Hi my dear students, now we are going to learn about history third lesson, first phase of the Indian national movement. Okay, first phase of the Indian national movement. Now we are going to learn about the first phase of Indian national movement. The national movement can be divided into three phases. The early nationalist 1885 to 1907, that period only called moderate era. Early nationalist period, that is also called moderate era. Secondly, assertive phase and the Gandhian era. Okay. The national movement can be divided into three phases. The early nationalist 1885 to 1907 period is called the early nationalist period or moderate period. Now we are going to study about the early nationalist. The early nationalist means the initial years of Congress. We already studied Indian National Congress formation and everything. So the initial years of the Congress was led by a group of leaders known as the early nationalists. So who were called this early nationalists? The leaders who led initial years of the Congress. They were called early nationalists. The initial years of the Congress was led by a group of leaders known as early nationalists. These early nationalists were also known as moderates. Why they were called moderates? Because they were modest or mild in their views, demands and methods. Okay, remember that point. That's one more question. Why these early nationalists were also called moderates? Early nationalists were also called moderates because they were modest or mild in their views, demands and methods. They believed in liberal and moderate approach in politics. They adopted peaceful and constitutional method. They believed in liberal and moderate approach in politics. They adopted peaceful and constitutional method to achieve their demands. The members of this group were educated middle class people such as lawyers, teachers, barristers, like that people only. Okay, they adopted peaceful and constitutional method to achieve their demands. The members of this group were educated middle class people such as lawyers, barristers, teachers, etc. Now, who were these great moderate leaders? Okay, now remember here only one mark question is there. The early nationalists were also called moderates. Why they were called moderates? Because they were modest or mild in their views, demands and methods. Okay. Now let us learn about the leaders. The prominent leaders: W.C. Banerjee, Rash Bihari Ghosh, Surendranath Banerjee from Bengal, and Dadabhai Naroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale from Maharashtra and Gujarat, P.R. Naidu, Subramania Iyer and Anantacharyalu from Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, Pandit Madan Mohan Malaviya from Uttar Pradesh, and two great two Englishmen called Ayohum and Wedderburn. These are the various leaders who participated in early nationalist movement. Okay, who are the great leaders? W.C. Banerjee, Rash Bihari Ghosh and Surendranath Banerjee from Bengal, Dadabhai Naroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale from Maharashtra and Gujarat, P.R. Naidu, Subramania Iyer and Anantacharyalu from Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, Pandit Madan Mohan Malaviya from Uttar Pradesh, and two Englishmen were called Ayohum and Wedderburn. Okay, Wedderburn. These are the prominent leaders of early nationalist movement. Okay. Now see, this early, they had full faith. What is their belief? Belief of this early nationalist. They had full faith in British justice and goodwill. And they believed that they hoped, they want certain reforms. They hope British would grant home rule to Indians. They hope British should grant home rule to Indians, and also they felt that the moment the British understood the problems of Indians, they would solve their problems. They just want certain reforms, and also they even felt that Indians had benefited from the British administration in the form of introduction of English and modern means of transport and communication, because they introduced lot of reforms in our country. So because of that, these early nationalists, they have full faith and hope in British people at all. They believed British sense of justice. They hope they would grant home rule because they introduced certain reforms such as cleansing social evils such as sati, untouchability, child marriages, etc. They want Indians should have their legitimate share in the government. Okay, early nationalists want only what Indians should have their legitimate share in the government at all. So, one of the prominent national leader, B.C. Pal, is Bipin Chandra Pal. He is one of the greatest early nationalist leader. He remarked about his loyalty toward the British people. Very greatly he remarked about his loyalty toward the British people at all. So, according to the early nationalists, the Britishers are very good people and they hope British would grant home rule because they introduced certain reforms in our country. Apart from that, their administration form also introduction of English, modern means of transport and communication, cleansing social evils such as sati, untouchability, child marriages, etc. Because of all these reasons, early nationalists, they hope Britishers would grant home rule to Indians. They also believed that British would help them to govern India in a Western style. Okay, these are the beliefs of early nationalists. Now let us learn the demands of early nationalists. Okay, the demands of early nationalists. So there are a number of demands. So demands also classified: constitutional demands, then economic reforms, administrative demands, and defense of civil rights. Now let us learn about constitutional demands. They wanted a larger share in the government of the country. They wanted a larger share in the government of the country. That also they aimed to get through a gradual process. They made the following demands. What are the various demands they asked at all? First thing, abolition of Indian Council. Earlier, there is an Indian Council, but the early nationalists asked the British people to abolish that Indian Council at all. And secondly, expansion of a legislative council. Abolition of Indian Council, expansion of legislative council. Thirdly, increase the membership of Indians. For that they raised the slogan, no taxation without representation. Okay, that means if Indians are getting representation in the council or legislative council or the administrative body, if they are getting membership, means then only British people have right to collect tax from our people at all. Okay, so abolition of Indian Council, expansion of legislative council, increase the membership of Indians. For that they raised a slogan, no taxation without representation at all. Okay, self-government within the empire itself. These are the main administrative demands put forward by early nationalists. Okay, constitutional demands put forward by early nationalists. So first point, constitutional demands. Constitutional demands means mainly they wanted a larger share in the government of the country. That also they aimed to get through the gradual process. For that purpose, they made the following demands. First thing, abolition of Indian Council. This abolition of Indian Council mainly to liberal policies. Because of this Indian Council, Indian people did not get liberal policies in India. It prevented liberal policies in India at all. So that's why they demanded Britishers to abolish the Indian Council. Secondly, expansion of legislative council. That means more membership. Indians should get more membership at all. Increase the membership of Indians. Thirdly, increase the membership of Indians. For that, they raised the slogan, no taxation without representation. That means Indian membership should increase. Then only they will pay the tax. That means if they are getting membership in administrative or legislative council, then only they will pay the tax. If there is no membership, means they are not ready to pay the tax. That's only the meaning of no taxation without representation. Fourth point, self-government. Within the empire itself, they want to establish a self-government. That is the administrative constitutional reform. Secondly, Economic demands. Economic demands, first thing, reduction in land revenue and protection of peasants from unjust landlords. We know already Britishers collected different type of taxes or land revenue from the poor farmers, and also poor farmers suffered lot in the clutches of landlords. So first thing, reduce the land revenue and protection of farmers or peasants from unjust landlords. Secondly, reduction of army expenditure. We already studied subsidiary alliance. According to this subsidiary alliance, every Indian ruler should keep an army, and that army members, army expenditure who should see, the Indian ruler should see at all. So that army expenditure should reduce. That is the second point, reduction of army expenditure. Thirdly, an inquiry into India's growing poverty and famines. They need an inquiry into India's growing poverty and famines. Next, fourth point, availability of cheap credit peasants through agriculture bank. Farmers should get credit facility through agriculture bank. That all cheaply they should get credit facility through agriculture bank. Then development of banking, irrigation, health and medicinal facilities sector. These are the economic demands. Industrial growth also they demanded through the trade protection and abolition of salt tax and sugar duties. These are the economic demands they put forward at all. So first of all, reduction in land revenue and protection of peasants from unjust landlords. Secondly, reduction of army expenditure. Thirdly, an inquiry in India's growing poverty and famine. Fourthly, Indian farmers should get cheap credit through agriculture bank. Then development of banking, irrigation, health and medicinal facilities. Next, industrial growth through trade protection. And last point, what? Abolition of salt tax and sugar duty. These are the economic demands. Then administrative demands. First thing, administrative demands mainly provide opportunity for Indians in civil service in England as well as in India. They demanded Indians should get civil service in England as well as in India. Opportunity to write civil service in England and India. Secondly, separation of judiciary from executive. Then the Indians should get protection from arbitrary act of British police. That means judiciary separated from executive means Indians should get protection from arbitrary acts of British police at all. Then thirdly, local bodies should get more power. Local people or local body should get more power. Then wider employment for Indians in administrative service. More employment opportunities should get for Indians in administrative service. Then spread of primary education. That means everybody should get opportunity to study in primary classes. Then improve the police system. Apart from that, they also demanded repeal Arms Act and License Act. We already studied Arms Act and License Act. Only the people, only the Indians to keep arms means they need war weapons means they need what a particular license. These all they have to repeal at all. So these are the administrative demands. Okay. Once again listen. Provide opportunity for Indians in civil service in England and India at a time. Then separation of judiciary from executive. Then only Indians can protect themselves from the arbitrary acts of British police. Thirdly, the local police should get more power. Then wider employment opportunities for Indian in administrative field. Spread the primary education and improve the police system. Repeal Arms Act and License Act. Then last point, defense of civil rights. What is the last point? Defense of civil rights. Whenever British government tried to curtail their civil rights, the early nationalists defended it and demanded the following attack. Okay, defense of civil rights. British people or British rulers, they tried to curtail the civil rights of Indians, especially the early nationalists. So whenever the British people tried to curtail the civil rights of Indians, they defended it and demanded the following. What are that following? First thing, removal of freedom of press and speech. Secondly, abolition of the Prevention Detention Act and restriction of individual liberty such as right to assemble and to form association. Okay. So the last point, defense of civil right. Whenever their civil rights were curtailed by British people, the early nationalists defended it in a following way. First of all, they demanded for removal of freedom of press and speech. Secondly, abolition of the Prevention Detention Act. Okay. First one, removal of freedom of press and speech. Secondly, abolition of Prevention Detention Act and restriction of individual liberties such as right to assemble and right to form association. Okay. Abolition of Prevention Detention Act and restriction of individual liberty. That means every citizen should get right to assemble or the right to form association. Okay. Now the methods of early nationalists. What are the methods they followed? The methods are mainly their method popularly known as constitutional agitation method. Okay, this is also one of the 1 mark question. What method they followed? They followed a particular method called constitutional agitation method. Particular method called constitutional agitation method. The method adopted by early nationalists had two objectives. Okay, two objectives are there, first and second. So their method popularly known as constitutional agitation method, and this method had two objectives. Now the first objective was to educate people in India in modern politics. Okay, so the first set of method, their main intention of this method was to educate people in India in modern politics. Secondly, to arouse national political consciousness and create united public opinion. Okay, first one, to educate Indian people in modern politics. Secondly, to arouse national political consciousness and create united public opinion. To achieve this, they relied on following methods. Okay, to achieve this first objective, they followed certain methods. So what are the methods they followed? First, they held meetings. Resolutions for popular demands were passed at all. Okay, they held meetings and resolutions for popular demands were passed. Secondly, they criticized government policies through press. Thirdly, they sent memorandums and petitions to government officials and the British Parliament at all. Okay, so first method, their method is also known as constitutional agitation method. So the method adopted by early nationalists had two objectives. So first objective was to educate Indian people in modern politics and also to arouse national political consciousness and create united public opinion. For that, to achieving this method, they followed certain methods. What are that? They held meetings and resolutions for popular demands were passed. Secondly, they criticized government policies through press. Thirdly, they sent memorandums and petitions to government officials and the British Parliament. Now see, second objective. Second means second set of methods. Second objective is mainly for what purpose? To influence British government and public. This is mainly to influence British government and the British public. For this, they followed the following method. First one, here they use 3 P's. Here they use 3 P's. What is this 3 P's? Pray, petition, prayer and protest. Okay, remember the point. Here they use 3 P's. 3 P's means what? Petitions, prayers and protest. Okay, here they use 3 P's. Petition, prayers and protest. They send petitions, requests and letters of protest to the British government to look into the problems of Indians. Okay, they send petitions, requests and letters of protest to the British government to look into the problems of Indians. Secondly, a British committee of the Indian National Congress was set up. Secondly, a British committee of the Indian National Congress was set up in London in 1889. They published a weekly journal, India, that is the name of a weekly journal, India, to present India's case before the British public. Okay. Secondly, what they did, a British committee of the Indian National Congress that they set up in India in 1885, and they published a weekly journal called India, and in that journal, to present India's case through that journal, they want to present India's case before British people. Okay, before British public. Then Indian leaders were sent to Britain. Thirdly, they sent Indian leaders to Britain to create awareness among British people and politicians about the plight of Indians. Okay. Thirdly, the Indian leaders were sent to Britain. For what purpose? To create awareness among British people and politicians about the helplessness of Indians. Dadabhai Naoroji, he played a major role in this case and carried an active propaganda in Britain. He is regarded as India's unofficial ambassador in England, and he was the first Indian to become the member of British House of Commons. Who? Dadabhai Naoroji. He was the first Indian to become the member of the British House of Commons. Okay. Now listen again. Once again, the second objective. Second set of method, mainly to influence British government and British public. For this, they followed the following methods. First thing, they used 3 P's. 3 P's means petitions, prayers, and protest. So they sent petitions, requests, and letters of protest to British government to look into the problems of Indians. Secondly, they appointed a British Committee of Indian Nation Congress in India in 1889, and they published a weekly journal called India to present India's case before the British public. Then thirdly, Indian leaders were sent to Britain to create awareness among British people and politicians about the plight of Indians. Plight means what? Helplessness of Indians. And Dadabhai Naoroji was one of the main person behind all this program. He played a major role and carried on an active propaganda in Britain. He is regarded as India's unofficial ambassador in England, and he was the first Indian to become member of the British House of Commons. Okay, now we studied the demands and also the objectives, and demands also completed at all. Next. Now let us learn the achievements of moderates. Moderates means early nationalists. They were the powerful force during that period. So moderates were able to create a wide national awakening among the people, and that arose to the feeling of one nation. Okay. First point, moderates were able to create a wide national awakening among the people, and that arose the feeling of one nation. Secondly, they popularized the idea of liberty, equality, democracy, and secularism. Okay? They popularized the idea of democracy, liberty, secularism, and nationalism. They exposed the true nature of British rule in India. That means how Britishers exploited Indians. That nature they exposed very clearly. So because of the efforts of these early nationalists, following reforms has taken place. Okay. Now their first achievement, moderate, they were able to create a wide national awakening among the people, and that arose the feeling of one nation. Secondly, they popularized the idea of democracy, liberty, and secularism, and also nationalism. They exposed the true nature of British rule in India. That means how Britishers exploited Indians. That they given a very clear picture. Then, the efforts of these early nationalists led certain reforms. Now, what are that reforms? First one, Britishers appointed Public Service Commission in 1886. Appointment of Public Service Commission in 1886. Secondly, holding of civil service examination simultaneously in London and in India. At a time, in India and London, Indian civil service examination conducting, that also reforms they introduced. Then thirdly, appointment of Welby Commission on Indian expenditure. To study the Indian expenditure, regarding that they appointed a new commission called Welby Commission in the year 1895. Dadabhai Naoroji only got that in charge. He was the first Indian member to inquire this matter. Then thirdly, the moderates succeeded. In this way, the moderates succeeded in getting the expansion of legislative council. Slowly, Legislative Council expanded and by the Indian Council Act of 1892 at all. Okay. Listen again, the reforms that were introduced by British people after the efforts of moderate people. First one, the appointment of Public Service Commission, 1886. Secondly, holding of Indian Civil Service Examination simultaneously in London and India. Thirdly, appointment of Welby Commission on Indian Expenditure in 1895. So, Dadabhai Naoroji only got the responsibility to inquire this matter. Thus, the moderates succeeded in getting expansion of Legislative Council by Indian Council Act of 1892. Okay. Now, the third lesson, first part we completed at all. So, first moderate period. Moderate period, that is also called early nationalist period. That means initial years of the Congress was led by group of leaders. That group of leaders only called early nationalists. They were also called moderates because they were modest or mild in their views, demands and methods. That's why they were called moderates. Okay. They have certain belief about British people and they hoped Britishers would grant home rule to them at all. Okay. And important leaders we know already: W.C. Banerjee, Rashbihari Ghosh, Surendranath Banerjee, Dadabhai Naoroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, P.R. Naidu, Subramania Iyer, Anacharyu, Madan Mohan Malavya, and two English people, A.O. Hume and Woodruff. These are the greatest leaders who belong to early nationalist era. Okay. So, they believed British sense of justice. They hoped British would grant home rule because they introduced certain reforms like what? Cleansing social evils like sati, untouchability, child marriage and also transportation facilities also introduced at all. So, surely they believed that, Indians believed that Britishers would help them to govern India in Western style at all. And their demands mainly constitutional demands. Constitutional demands we know already. They wanted a large share in government of the country and they also aimed to get through that in gradual process. Mainly abolition of Indian Council, expansion of Legislative Council, increase of the membership of Indians. For that they raised the slogan, no taxation without representation. Then self-government within the empire itself. These are belong to constitutional demands. Then economic demands: reduction of land revenue, protection of peasants from unjust landlord, reduction of army expenditure, inquiry in India's growing poverty and famines. Then availability of cheap credit to peasants through agriculture banks, development of banking, irrigation, health and medicinal facility, industrial growth through trade protection, abolition of salt tax and sugar duty. Then administrative demands: opportunity for Indians to participate in Indian civil service as well as to conduct civil service examination in England and India at a time. Then separation of judiciary from executive. Local bodies should get more power. Wider employment of Indians in administrative service. Spread of primary education. Improve police system. Repeal Arms Act and License Act. Then defense of civil rights. So whenever British government tried to curtail their civil rights, these early nationalists, they defended it and demanded the following. What are the things? Removal of freedom of press and speech, abolition of Prevention of Detention Act and restriction of individual liberty. And that means right to assemble and right to form associations. Then methods. Two methods are there. The methods popularly known as constitutional agitation method. And they follow two methods. First method objective is what? To educate people in India in modern politics. Was to educate people in India in modern politics and also to arouse national political consciousness and created a united public opinion. For that, they held meetings, resolutions for popular demands were passed. And they criticized government policies through press. They also sent memorandums and petitions to get to government officials and British Parliament. Okay. Second objective was to influence British government and British public. For this, they followed certain methods. First thing, 3Ps. 3Ps means what? Petition, prayer and protest. They sent petitions, requests and letters of protest to the British government to look into the problems of Indians. Then appoint a committee, British Committee of Indian National Congress, set up in India in 1889, and they published a weekly journal, India, to present India's case before British public. Then Indian leaders sent to Britain to create awareness among British people and politicians. Among that, the prominent leader only, Dadabhai Naoroji, only took that responsibility at all. Last, the achievements of moderates. Moderates were able to create national awakening among the people, and that aroused a feeling of one nation. Then they popularized the idea of democracy, liberty, secularism and nationalism. They exposed true nature of British rule in India, and apart from that, because of their efforts, Britishers introduced certain reforms. What are that reforms? Appointment of Public Service Commission in 1886, then holding a Indian Civil Service examination simultaneously in London and India. Thirdly, appointment of Welby Commission on Indian Expenditure, 1895. That responsibility Dadabhai Naoroji got, and he was the first one to inquire this matter. Then the moderates succeeded in getting expansion of Legislative Council by the Indian Council Act of 1892. Okay, so the first part completed.